Welcome to Broadcast, an initiative by the Composers Society of Singapore. Broadcast is an online interview series featuring conversations with Singapore composers, produced by CSS student members To Yen Yi and Rebecca Tan. Join us as we invite CSS member composers to share with us their musical journey, compositional processes and inspirations, as well as their perspectives on music. Hi, I'm Yen Yi, and you're watching episode 4 of the first edition of Broadcast, presented to you by CSS. Our guest for this final episode is Tan Yuting, an award-winning Singaporean composer who's currently pursuing her PhD in music composition at the University of Chicago. Some of Yuting's recent works include Eve and the Lost Ghost Family, a song cycle based on poems by Felix Cheong, which was performed earlier this year at the Esplanade Concourse, as well as Metro, which received its Asian premiere at the Singapore Symphony Orchestra's 2020 National Day concert. Join me for this episode as I meet with Yuting to chat about her recent works and the development of her compositional practices and artistic identity over the years. I guess maybe you could give a short little introduction of where you're currently at right now in terms of education as well as your composition.
Right, so I'm currently studying in Chicago at the University of Chicago, doing my PhD in composition. Yeah, I actually came back to Singapore almost a year ago now because of COVID, and I've been just working remotely from Singapore. So this is like actually my 9th year of university. Before that, I was doing my master's at Peabody Conservatory, doing my master's in composition and music theory pedagogy. And before that, I was in Yonsei-to for my undergraduate. Yeah.
Have you been studying consistently since YST, or have you taken a break in between?
No, I did not take a gap year or anything in between. So yes, I have been in school consecutively since YST. Yeah, but I guess because I'm moving from one school to the next, there's always a change in environment, and right now, even between doing masters and undergrad, and even between doing the PhD and masters, there's always something different.
So what was your experience learning composition formally for the first time? I would suppose that would be in Yonsei-to.
Yes, to answer your question, yes, YST was the first time I had formal one-on-one composition lessons. Before that, in JC, I was in MEP, so I did do some composing, and there was feedback in class, but it wasn't very. We would spend maybe just 15 minutes each week or something. So it's not we're looking very deeply into the composition. Yeah, so it was definitely an eye-opener. Yeah, I just remember being a little bit pressured as well to write a lot of music because now you're just expected to be writing music. But at the same time, it's a lot of refining a piece, whereas before that, I would just be writing something, and then we get some feedback, and then we edit it a little bit, and then it's more or less done. But in YST, it's where I really got the time to hone my technique and refine every piece that I write a little bit more than before, but more can still be done.
I know that you have this piece or series of pieces called Chinatown, centered around Chinatown, and the text was by Singaporean poet Dr. Tan Lei. So I'm quite interested to find out how you got the inspiration to write this, and what were you particularly looking to do in this song cycle?
The Chinatown song cycle was actually part of my senior year project in YST. I knew at that point that I wanted to write a song cycle because I wanted to work with text, poetry specifically. So I turned to the closest poet I know, who is my uncle. So Dr. Tan is actually my uncle. Yeah, so I talked to him, and it happened to be SG50 that year. And he was writing a book of 200 poems commemorating SG50. So he would be writing about different places and locations around Singapore, different landmarks of Singapore. He shared with me all 200 poems. And then I went through each one of them and I picked the ones that resonated most with me or that I thought had potential to be set into song. So I actually picked 3 poems. So the first and the last song is actually from the same poem. And what I did was I cut it in half, which was exactly how he arranged it in the book as well. So he had like the text, the poem from the first song like on the left side, and then he had a picture in between, and then the words from the last song on the right side. So I just kind of followed that division as well in my setting of the song.
Wow, really interesting. I'm actually quite interested to know about your how you started your compositional journey, like growing up in a, I would suppose, a family that is more inclined towards the arts in general. So was pursuing composition something that you had in mind from a young age?
I think music has always been like very important to me since I was a kid. And yeah, so when I started learning piano when I was 4, I was already very interested in music. And because I started in Yamaha, and I actually went for Yamaha lessons until I was 12 or something like that. So there was a lot of like improvisation, which I actually really enjoyed. So I think that was like my first taste of composition. I think later on in the Yamaha courses, there was also like some simple composition based on functional harmony. I think that was like really good training for me as a child. Yeah, and then later on when my sisters came along and they also, took piano lessons and they also enjoyed music. That was really nice. The first time, so we actually all had our own musical things. We probably sang in a choir together, all 3 of us, for the first time only, like in 2018. Yeah, because of our age gap. So my younger sister was always in the children's choir, and then the youth choir only started quite recently, and then that was when
Yeah.
we all joined. Yeah.
So now we'll move on to talk about your first piece that you will be sharing today, which is titled Kotekan.
So Kotekan was the first piece that I wrote during my master's program at Body. Yeah, so stepping into a new environment. So not really a new teacher because I actually worked with the same teacher during my joint degree program in undergrad. So I was working with Oscar Bettison for 3 semesters in my undergraduate studies already. So like going to PUD and meeting him again for my master's. So it wasn't exactly new, but sort of new as well because joint degree it was more like on and off with learning with him. So he sort of gave me a challenge and told me to write a percussion piece without any pitch material. And then I basically started the piece by going to a hardware store in Baltimore and just trying to find objects that I could work with, objects that could create different sounds that I could work with. And so I chanced upon the metal flanges. So that's the one that you hear right at the beginning of the piece. So I think they're used in plumbing usually. But I had no idea what they were before writing this piece and before going to the hardware store. And then the rest of the things that I used in the piece, including the metal pipes, because the were already found in the Peabody Percussion Studio. So I went to the hardware store and then I went to the percussion studio to see like what I could use that was not specifically pitched. So the problem with the metal bars in the Peabody Percussion Studio was that they were actually pitched because they were actually used in a separate piece. But I decided to, let the percussionists themselves pick what gongs and what metal pipes they wanted to use, as long as it was like spread across an octave. So I did not notate specific pitches for them to pick, or even in rehearsal, like they asked me and I was like, yeah, it's up to you, And yeah, I think they had fun doing that. I'm not sure. Yeah. And as for the title, Kotekan, I've always liked gamelan music, specifically the interlocking rhythms and the hocketing in gamelan, which makes it interesting in Balinese gamelan. So I wanted to take that idea of the interlocking parts and have my own interpretation of that to the objects that I found. Okay, do you see it?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, so this is the score for Kotekan. So percussion 1 and percussion 2 have a similar setup and they're facing one another. And percussion 4 is playing a drum set. And percussion 3 is just playing drums, congas, bongos, and some wood blocks and tambourine.
Yeah, so maybe we will just listen to the piece once through and then then we can have comments for later.
Yeah, okay.
Yay! I'm wondering how you conceptualize the structure for this piece. At the start, it kind of alternates between these two distinct sections, and after that, like it kind of progresses into something a little bit different. But you recap it in the last bit of your piece. So, wondering what is the process of like coming up with the structure of it.
Yeah, I think I started off with different sound worlds that I wanted to have in the piece. So the opening sound world was like the two flanges like being played like cymbals, and then having them interlock, that was like one idea. This second idea I would say would be the groove, having the groove come in. And then I know I wanted to go into another section that where it feels a little more like weightless, maybe I would say, like having the drum set play in a way that might not be how you usually perceive a drum set to be playing, because I think when people see a drum set they immediately assume that there is going to be a groove throughout. Yeah, so having those three basic sound worlds, and then after that I plotted the piece. In the first part of the piece, yeah, you're right, it's alternating between like the flanges interlocking idea and the groove idea. I do have like percussion 1 and 2, they might be alternating parts as well. So maybe the first time you hear it, percussion 1 is playing this, and then the next time it comes back again, percussion 2 is playing it instead. So halfway through the piece, I switched to the percussion 3 playing with hands on the congas and the bongos. That's the more free section for me. That's where also the first time in the piece where you hear the nipple gongs. Yeah. So for me, it's also about like saving certain sounds for later in the piece. So sounds that you don't hear at the beginning of the piece. So as the piece goes, you're constantly, there's something added to the layer. So after the slow section, the opening material comes back, yes, but instead of having the percussion 1 and 2 playing on the metal pipes, I have them play the interlocking rhythm on the gongs from the slow section. And then right at the end, when the interlocking idea between the flanges come back, I have the percussion 3 and 4 playing on the triangles. So the idea for that was to have something completely different that you didn't hear before in the piece, but also kind of fits into the general sound world. And also I thought like for triangles, they're pretty small. So, being in the audience, you wouldn't see it there. And I specifically had them like not hung up already. So they had to hold it up. So it was at the end, like surprise, like triangle. Yeah, yeah, that was the idea at least. Yeah.
So with that, you mentioned that this piece was your first piece when you went into the master's program at Peabody. So um, how has your musical direction or style developed over the years from when you were at YHT, then you went to Peabody and now at Chicago? And what are some things that are constant from your days as like an undergraduate?
I think it's so hard for me to say for myself. Like, I think when I was in YSC, I felt more like I had to write music a certain way, not because of um, the school exactly, but I think it's just a matter of being like a younger composer. I think at that point in time when you're just starting out, like when for me when I was just starting out, yeah, and having formal composition lessons for the first time, it's like you're not really, I wasn't really sure of myself yet, and I think that is one thing that maybe has changed a little over the years. Like now when I make certain decisions in my compositions, I'm a bit more sure of my decisions, a little more brave to make certain decisions also, I think, at least from my perspective.
What has living abroad impacted you in terms of like musically and also as a whole?
Living abroad, like the first thing like definitely is like independence, like being more independent, because I have been living in Singapore my whole life before that. So yeah, that's one thing. And then secondly, musically, the difference that I saw in myself that I mentioned before, like being more brave and being more sure about my own decisions. I think that also comes from like studying in the US for a while and being exposed to different types of music over there. I would say that new music that I heard when I was in the US was a lot more diverse than what we could get in Singapore. I mean, understandably, because it's, you know, a bigger country, there are more people, and, you know, yeah. So that was an eye-opening experience for me, going there and realizing that, oh, you can do this in your music.
I have another question, which is when we go to have a music education in school in Singapore, we almost have very little to no exposure to new music. So when you first encountered this, even now, what does new music, this term, mean to you?
First, I would like to say that it's just what people associate with new music. Like they think that it's, you know, dissonant and like unpleasant to listen to or whatever, like inaccessible in general. And I do agree with that to a certain extent. Like, I think it's just like a matter of getting used to. So one example I can think of is actually when I was in year one in YST, I listened to a certain composer's piece in a concert and I did not understand a single thing. And I was really bored and I was like, what is going on? Like, I don't know what's going on. And then in year four, that composer came back to YST and they played her pieces again. And I was a huge fan. So I think, you know, that was something that was very subconscious for me. Like, it wasn't like over the 4 years I was constantly listening to her music or whatever. And that was why I think I could see that stark contrast, because I wasn't actively, you know, listening to the music by her, but then like that's why I could see like a huge difference that, you know, between my first year and my fourth year. Yeah. And so I think for anyone out there, it's just a matter of listening more to it. And I think as composers and, you know, advocates for new music, I guess it's also our job to like make it seem less daunting for people who want to, yeah, listen to new music. I mean, new music is just anything that is, you know, new. That's anything that's written in our time.
So now we can go into the second piece, which is Dream Sequence, which I also heard in International Composition Institute of Thailand, which we were both in. So yay!
Yeah. Can you see the score?
That was a really nice performance.
Yeah, it was a little strange because, I think that was my first time doing a remote rehearsal kind of situation and also remote concert. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it was quite impressive how, like, it was also my first experience with like a remote
Yeah.
rehearsal, and I was quite surprised like how it turned out in the end, like despite the distance, and like usually unless you're like there physically, it's a bit difficult to work on some of the details. But I think like Tessati really did a great job for all of our pieces.
Yeah. These chords, they're used only at the first section of the piece. So I knew I wanted to have sort of like a descending chord sequence that underlies the entire first section. And so I chose these fundamental pitches and then picked the partials in the harmonic series here. So between the first and the third chord, there's like the second chord, which is a combination of pitches from both the first and the third chord. So if you can see the notes that are in like diamond shaped, those are from the third chord. Yeah, so this was used at the beginning of the piece for sort of like a dream state kind of thing and going deeper and deeper into it.
I think in this piece everything really like gels together.
I'm glad you feel that way
Yeah.
because I think that was the idea I had in mind. So I had the idea for the first section, and then I actually had the idea for a much later section, the part where the piano alternates between palm muting and ordinario and it's playing like two notes, the C and B. And it's go, da, 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 da. Yeah, so I had that idea, and then like I knew I wanted like that as like the fast material, and then like having more rhythmic interactions between the ensemble. And then that was one idea, and then the other idea was the opening material where everything was more about the harmonic direction and everything was like more floating in a sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I like the combination of like timbres that you explore in the later part of the piece.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
So what are you currently working on in terms of like projects or any priorities as of now?
I'm just finishing up a song cycle that will be played actually this month. So I don't know, like by the time this comes out, maybe it'll be over. but it's a song cycle for soprano and harp. And I worked with a local Singaporean poet, Felix Cheong. So he wrote the poems, and I decided to set them to two songs. It's called Eve and the Lost Ghost Family. So it's sort of about a 14-year-old goth girl called Eve, and she and her family, they die in a car crash, and the ghosts form of themselves sort of wander up, lost back in their old apartment, sort of exploring like a little bit of like death and the afterlife. Yeah, and then like they find themselves up in the old apartment, the ghosts find themselves in the old apartment, and then like the cycle of their life sort of like begins again, and then it just like recurs over and over. So that's the overall idea for like the story behind the poems.
Right.
Yeah, but it's dark. But what I liked about Felix's poems was that they're also very whimsical and a bit funny. So there's a bit of like humor in there as well. So yeah, it's not all like doom. Yeah. And not all like very dark things, but yeah, there's a lighter side to it as well. So that was really fun to explore musically. Yeah, and then there are a couple postponed things from previously that are happening later this year in August, to a piece for vocal quartet and percussion quartet. So
you're quite into like voice music nowadays.
I think for a period of time, especially the last 2 years, I was writing a lot of instrumental music, orchestra stuff, or a lot of piano chamber ensemble things. And so I was actively looking for opportunities to write for vocals. And I think it went a little too much. So now I have like only vocal works. I mean, yeah, I have some instrumental works that I need to write. I have to write a large saxophone ensemble piece. So I think that's the main non-vocal work that I'm working on. But other than that, it's almost all voice thing, which is really fun because I get to work with other people. Like, I get to work with poets, and I get to work with words, and yeah, that's also a recent interest of mine.
Yeah, sounds exciting though.
I'm excited.
Okay, so okay, maybe to just end off this entire session, oh, it's really fast. But maybe to end off this entire session, you have a message or something to say for aspiring musicians, composers, or students who are currently maybe studying music in schools and are interested in pursuing music?
Well, I feel like I'm also talking to like my younger self. Like, yeah, so maybe these would be like some words that I would have for my younger self, would be like to not be afraid of doing certain things, including pursuing music, I guess. Yeah, and also to listen a lot more. I myself am guilty of that as well, like of not listening enough. And I know there's so much out there to listen and to see, and yeah, so it's also, I guess, a reminder for myself here to listen more, and yeah, for everyone. Yeah.
Thank you so much once again for doing this and taking the time off to share
Thank
your
you for
music.
asking me to do this. See
Bye.
you. Bye.
We've come to the end of the first edition of Broadcast, presented to you by the Composers Society of Singapore. If you liked this series, do remember to like and share these videos. If you compose, perform, or have interest in new music, Why not join the Composer Society of Singapore as a member and be part of a community of like-minded individuals and advocates of new music? To get the latest updates on new music in Singapore, do subscribe to our newsletter via our website, linked in the description below. Once again, my name is Yan Yi, and thank you for tuning in to Broadcast.